Welcome back to the Culture Coach podcast. I am thrilled to have my guest today, Garry Ridge. Garry, welcome to the show.
G'day, Wendy. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me along.
I'm so excited to dig into this intentional culture conversation, learn more about your book. But tell us where you are in your life right now. You've retired from WD-40. What's happening in your life right now?
Well, I don't like the word retired.
Okay.
I've refired. So yes, I was 35 years at WD-40 company, 25 years. I had the privilege of being the CEO and later chairman of the board. And about 3 years ago this August, I refired. And now what I do is I help leaders build cultures of belonging where love, forgiveness, and learning inspire a happy, more connected world. And I do that through my coaching practice, through consulting, and through speaking. And of course, I've just written a new book called Any Dumbass Can Do It, which is really a reflection of my 25 years, what I call as an apprentice leader. I said I've now completed my 25-year apprenticeship in leadership. I need to put it to work. So that's what I do now. I'm also on the board of another great company based out of Cincinnati called Gorilla Glue. So if it's stuck, use WD-40. If it isn't stuck, get yourself some Gorilla Glue.
I love it. Well, you are very modest. I think you had a great career at WD-40 and really helped to turn the culture into something phenomenal. And I love the name of the book because it really, for me, it seems like it's so simple that the things that you need to do to build an intentional culture is pretty simple, but we know that it is hard work. So I'm curious, I'd love to hear if we could start with the early years of building the culture at WD-40, how that started.
Yeah. So, I would say it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
And time is not your friend. And that's why the title of the book is what it is that I truly believe that if you understand the ingredients as a leader you need to put in place in an organization to allow culture to grow in a positive way, and you execute on that consistently, then you will build a culture where people go to work every day, they make a contribution to something bigger than themselves, they learn something new, they're protected and set free by a compelling set of values, and they go home happy. And why that's important to me is that happy people create happy families create happy communities, and happy communities create a happy world. And no one will argue with me right now, a little happier world would be a good thing. So, when I was, awarded the privilege of leading as CEO, the culture wasn't broken. It just wasn't going to take us where we needed to go into the future. The brand was a strong US brand. We had a dream to take the blue and yellow can with little red top to the world. So the sun would never set on the can. So we wanted to create a culture where people had freedom to make choices. And I knew with my colleagues how to build the brand, but I wasn't quite sure on how we were to build this culture. And the first chapter of the book is about that awareness. I'm not Aussie. I was born in Sydney, Australia. I was actually traveling on a Qantas 747 from Los Angeles to Sydney. It was 2 a.m. in the morning, 38,000 feet above the South Pacific Ocean. And as you do when you travel like that, you take stuff to read. And I read a quote that was attributed to the Dalai Lama, and it was, our purpose in life is to make people happy. If we can't make them happy, at least don't hurt them. I thought, that sounds very interesting. And then I read something else an hour later probably, and it was a quote from Aristotle, who was born in 384 BC, and he said, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. And I thought, that's true. If we really enjoy what we're doing. And I thought, I wonder how you could do, what's the ingredient, the formulation to do that in a business? I didn't know. So anyhow, back in San Diego, a week or two later, I read an article in the local paper about a master's degree in leadership at the University of San Diego. And I was intrigued. So I went to an information session. And there I heard my now mentor and very dear friend, Dr. Ken Blanchard, who is the guru of servant leadership. And he said, most MBA programs get people in the head. We've got to start getting people in the heart. And I thought, that's so true. Mm-hmm. So here I am now. I'm 2 years in. I'm CEO of a US public company, and I went back to school. I went back and I enrolled in that program. And for the next 2 years, under the tutelage of Ken and many others, I really, really absorbed the principles of servant leadership, and we started to roll those out in the business. And over time, we then started to gain momentum and build the culture that we ended up with, which was, and then still in place, which is one where 98% of the people said they loved to work at the company, and we had a 93% employee engagement, very low turnover, and we had a lot of fun. So my answer is, it's about learning.
Yeah. 93% employee engagement. That is phenomenal. I mean, I was told, at least, I guess it's been about 10 years, like 65, recommended great place to work, employee engagement was a good score. So in the 90s is unheard of. That's phenomenal. And so
consistently wow. Over many years.
Did you start with values? Is that kind of the foundation?
Well, we start with the principles that I can now reflect on. The principles are, did you create an organization where people know, feel like, and treated like they belong? Mm. Do you have an organization where people know, feel like they matter, and the work they do makes a difference? Do you have a set of clear values that protect people and set them free and allow them to freely make choices? Have you reduced fear in an organization? In other words, established psychological safety by taking the fear of failure out. And we did that because we created what we called the learning moment. And then finally, we threw all the managers out. We changed titles from manager to coach, because our job as a leader is to be a coach and to help those we have the privilege to lead step into the best version of themselves. So those are the principles that we actually worked on. And then there's a lot of things, as you well know, that need to go in place to support those principles and build the foundation in the organization.
Yeah. And I think it was your first chapter when you were talking about tribal culture being the most enduring unifier. You said, but first we had to find a way to create an inspiring, emotionally compelling internal culture within the headquarters. So it's clear that you were looking for what was going to inspire and really connect with them, as you said, as Ken Blanchard said, that heart focus, not just the head focus. And so were you able to connect values in that way, or was that more the mission, vision?
It started off with a clearly defined purpose. So what's our purpose? And then values. So purpose and values were the headliners, if you will. But then there are elements that need to go in place. When I was a young lad in Australia going to high school, my science teacher gave me a petri dish. And the science teacher said, we're going to grow culture in this petri dish. So there are a couple of things you need to know if you're going to be successful growing culture. Number one is, what are the ingredients that you need to put in the petri dish to ensure you grow the culture you want to grow? And then secondly, as the owner of the petri dish, it's your responsibility to feed the good ingredients and be brave enough to attack the toxins so that they don't send the culture sour. So if, people are listening to us today and thinking, well, what are those ingredients? Well, you have to have a people first mindset. If we've got a purpose in place, we have to have we're coaches, not managers. We go there every day dedicated to helping those we lead succeed. You have to have brave accountability and behavior. A lot of people think that culture is the soft stuff. This is not soft. This is hard. It's hard work. So you've got to be brave. And you've got to have accountability. You have to have a clearly defined, authentic purpose. The values need to be hierarchical. And this is something I learned from Ken, in that you have a set of values and you rank them, the most important one down to the one that's not as important as the first one. And the reason that that is so powerful is that people can't cherry pick a value to make a decision based on a circumstance. You have to make things simple, transparency and simplicity. So many organizations camouflage issues with confusion to make out how smart they are. Make it simple. You have to have learning moments that reduce fear. And of course, you have to have the belonging and acceptance and connectedness. And then you have to care about your people. You have to be candid with your people. You need to hold them accountable. And accountability means, what do I expect from you and what do you expect from me? And then you have to make sure that there's a sense of responsibility. And we did that with something that we called the Maniac Pledge, which was another tool that we put in the organization.
What is the Maniac Pledge? I have to know.
Okay. So the Maniac Pledge is a statement that we did put together in the company to treat a very, very brutal disease that's in most organizations. And I call it the na-na-ni-na-na disease, the finger-pointing disease. So we came up with a permission statement, and the Maniac Pledge is pretty simple. It says, I am responsible for taking action, asking questions, getting answers, and making decisions. I won't wait for someone to tell me. If I need to know, I am responsible for asking. I have no right to be offended that I didn't get this sooner. And if I'm doing something others should know about, I am responsible for telling them. And this was the permission statement that we put into the fabric of the organization that allowed anybody at any level in the company to be able to ask the question, but also take responsibility.
At every level? Did you guys talk about that at every level of leadership in the organization?
At every level of the company.
I love that.
It was woven into this fabric of the organization. The two things that we talked about, or three that we talked about a lot, were our purpose, our values, our Maniac Pledge, and there was the fourth, and our learning moments. And, we said that we don't make mistakes, we have learning moments.
I did see an article, it was like 2016 in the Harvard Business Review about WD-40, and that you had built a learning-obsessed company culture. When I work with organizations, the first thing I try to do is help them create an intentional culture. Like maybe whether I think it's a good or a bad culture, I just need those leaders to be intentional about what they're creating based on their purpose, their mission, their values. But I do think there's something very special about creating a learning culture. Tell me how that benefited you and the positive results that you saw from creating that type of culture.
Well, it was very intentional. It was to get the word failure out of our vocabulary. I don't see too many people running down the corridors of organizations yelling out, hey, I'm a failure, I'm a failure. And actually, it goes back to the beginning of WD-40. Some people know this story, others don't. But in 1953, WD-40 company was called Rocket Chemical Company. It was a small fledgling organization in San Diego, California. And there was an issue and a challenge to stop condensation and corrosion in the umbilical cord of the Atlas space rocket. So the chemists got together and started to mix up formulations to see if they could solve the problem. Well, Formula 1 didn't work, and 6 didn't work, and 25 didn't work, and 37 didn't work. 38 and 39 didn't work either, but guess what? The 40th formula worked. So that's why it's named WD, Water Displacement 40th Formula.
Wow.
Now, if they had not had 39 learning moments, I wouldn't be talking to you today. So it was kind of there in a way within the organization. But I honestly believe that most people in organizations don't lie. What they do is they fake and they hide. And the reason they fake and hide is because of fear. And one of the biggest fears we have is failure. So why don't we say, instead of talking about failures, we're going to talk about learning. So we said, what's the definition of a learning moment? A learning moment is a positive or negative outcome of any situation that needs to be openly and freely shared to benefit all people. So we applauded people who shared a negative learning moment. We know that in most circumstances, we don't get it right the first time. Don't hide that. Talk about the learning that came from that and share it with everybody worldwide. And if we have a success, let's talk about it and share it. And what that did, it significantly increased psychological safety because now I didn't have to fake and hide,
Right.
which was really important. So that's why my consulting business is called The Learning Moment. Is that I think it was one of the key pillars of our success was taking that position of having a learning moment.
When I worked at the tech company that I mentioned, I think offline, where I experienced a really positive culture. One of the things that was embedded in our culture were we used strength finders as an assessment to, and we talked about it. You know, it was on our top 5 were on our desk. And one thing that I learned about how the hiring was working was they were specifically looking for learners, you know, in their top 5, because we were a tech company and which was ever evolving and always constantly needed to be learning. So I see the benefit, and I understand what you're saying too about just being able to admit that you've made a mistake and the value that brought WD-40 as a company. I'm curious go ahead.
And I think, you know, there's a core that runs through everything we did. Is we made it simple, and we had statements, and we had, you know, conversations that people truly understood. We didn't try to overcomplicate it. A learning moment, okay? People could, you know, they could accept that. A coach, not a manager. You know, I think getting it. So, oh yeah, you know, you're a coach, but now I can explain what the responsibilities of a coach are in an organization versus a manager. Good morning, I'm your manager. Oh, really? What are you going to do with that?
Yeah, you were reinforcing it with the language. And then it sounds like even storytelling and rituals that you had in the organization.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit, you've referenced the culture as a tribal culture. And I think some of that stemmed from your youth in Australia. Is that right?
Maybe. Yeah, well, I do reference the Indigenous Australians, but, you know, tribal was not to reflect any Indigenous group.
Okay.
Tribal was to reflect mankind. We are tribal by nature. The caveman was the member of a tribe. And, you know, I read books from, you know, like Sebastian Junger and others who have written books around tribal, which is really the essence of belonging. You know, if you're going to, do you belong to a company? No. Do you belong to a team? Well, no, you play on a team. Do you belong to a family? Yes. Do you belong to a clan? Yes. Do you belong to a tribe? Yes. Can you, you know, put identifications against that? Yes. So we called ourselves a tribe, the WD-40 tribe, and we had a just cause. And our just cause was a group of people that come together to protect and feed each other. So that was our just cause. Now, the interesting thing about it was that we were then able to describe what the attributes of our tribe were. So the attributes of our tribe were, number one, learning and teaching. The number one responsibility of a tribal leader is to be a learner and a teacher. I do use an example just to amplify that of thinking about Indigenous Australians. You know, if we were to, you know, turn back the clock and be in the middle of my homeland right now near that big old rock and watching a group of Indigenous Australians at a tribal meeting, the tribal leader would be teaching the tribe members to throw a boomerang. Why? Because the boomerang was the tool of survival. And if you couldn't throw the boomerang, you weren't going to survive. So I could use that as an example and say, so our role, number one role of a tribal leader is to be a learner and a teacher. That's why we're here. Tribes had values. Absolutely. Tribes had belonging. There were signs of belonging. Tribes were future focused. Those that survived were future focused. If we had a tribe and we were, you know, had our place of residence next to a lake and the lake was drying up, if we didn't look for a new lake, we'd have no water. Tribes recognize specialized skills. One of the favorite places I have in the world is Fiji. I got to sit with the tribal members in Fiji, and the thing that they told me that was so true was, within our tribe, we have people who are specialists in different things, and we respect them all. So in an organization, yeah, we have sales, we have marketing, we have accounting, we have finance, we have manufacturing. Nobody is the hero. We're all as important. We're warriors. Okay, we're going to come together to protect and feed each other. And finally, we're going to celebrate. There's nothing better than watching a great tribe celebrate. So by calling ourselves a tribe, we could have a just cause, we could belong to something, but we could describe the attributes that had to live within that ecosystem.
That makes total sense. I want to talk about belonging for a minute, a little bit further. If there is anything prescriptive or direction that you would give leaders in how to create more of a sense of belonging. I know some organizations have employee resource groups, or there's some sort of common language used, whether it's strength finders or maybe even DISC or the values. Is there anything that you did as an organization? I mean, you've mentioned a couple of them, but I'm thinking systems, from a systems perspective, that you put in place to help create belonging.
The heart. It's got to come from the heart of the leader. It's as simple as, walking up to you in the morning and saying, Wendy, how are you? What's on your mind? Is there anything getting in your way? How can I help? How can I care about you? Authenticity. Doing what I call spending a lot of time in the stinky locker room. I created this person here.
Oh,
okay. This is Alec, or Alice, the soul-sucking CEO of Fear Incorporated. I write about him and her in the book. And this leader has attributes that don't create belonging. Their ego eats their empathy instead of their empathy eating their ego. They're a micromanager. They think they're corporate royalty. You will never find them in the stinky locker room or in the cafeteria or canteen because somebody brings coffee to their desk. They love a fear-based culture. They're a master of control. They're a know-it-all. They don't value learning. They have all the answers, even the wrong ones. They must always be right. They hate feedback, and sometimes they don't keep their commitments. So if you've got that sort of behavior of leadership going on in the organization, you're not going to have an organization where people feel like they belong. So I think you can have systems, and you can have DISC, and you can have strength find, you have all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it comes from here, from the heart. Are we really there? Everybody who walks into an organization of a morning is someone's precious husband, wife, father, sister, whatever. And we as leaders are there to serve them. And that's what's really important.
And so do you think it's possible for CEOs or leaders, founders, is there a way to convince or influence leaders like your puppet, and if you're listening, go to YouTube and see this on camera, and you'll see the puppet. It's amazing. Yes. But if you have that type of CEO, is there help? Is it possible to build a sense of belonging or a strong culture?
This is where I get very confused. I don't understand why leaders and CEOs don't understand that there are two things that really drive performance in a business: strategy and execution. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have high will of the people, and the will of the people is highly engaged workforce that goes to work every day and is passionately executing against the elements of the strategy, you're going to get a lesser result than if you have a high number. So, I think that some of the short-term thinking, we should be about building enduring companies over time. And unfortunately, there's a lot of pressure out there on leaders to just get the next quarter. Next 90 days is all that matters. Or, there's something happens and we lay people off and we do all these crazy things. But Aristotle got it right. We're dumb learners. We're slow. Pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. So let's build a great strategic plan, but let's put as much energy and equal energy into the elements that we've shared today to build high will of the people. So we're not having an organization where 69% of people who go to work every day are disengaged or actively disengaged. Don't tell me that an organization with that sort of a crappy, employee engagement number is really performing well, because it's not. Yeah. Not only that, we're sending those people home unhappy. And what's that doing to their family life and to the communities they live in? So leaders need to wake up.
I appreciate your passion, and I feel the same way. The Gallup survey that came out for 2025 is only 31% of employees are engaged at work. That's down from 33% last year. A 2% drop in 1 year, like it's going the wrong direction. And what's really interesting to me is that I think it was another Gallup survey that showed that if you can connect the work an employee is doing with the mission or vision of the organization, you see a 25% reduction in turnover and a 15% improvement in productivity.
Absolutely.
Why are we not doubling down on culture? Like, it does not make sense to me.
That's what I do and what you do what you do. And as I go back, my purpose now is I help leaders build cultures of belonging where love, forgiveness, and learning inspire a happy, more connected world. And the thing that is I have on my side, I can call BS if people say it doesn't work.
Yeah,
because we, not me, but we at the company over that period of time took the value of the company from 300 million to 3.6 billion. We expanded to 176 countries around the world. And all we had was that blue and yellow can with a little red top and a few other things and some great people and a good strategy.
I'm curious if after all of that work and kind of the proof, have you been able to directly link, maybe it's not a direct link, but culture to revenue growth?
Absolutely. We 7x revenue. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a no-brainer.
Right. And I also heard that you did not do layoffs during your tenure. Is that?
Never.
Yeah. That is amazing.
No, we never laid one person. Now, some people left the company.
Sure.
But we never had what would be described as a layoff. When we went through some of the challenging times, we basically took the principle, it's better all of us hurt a little than a few of us hurt a lot. And we stuck together, and we got through it. And interestingly enough, in the Great Recession, as it was named, we didn't really suffer too badly. But the year after, we had the best year in the company's history so far, because we didn't have brain drain. We didn't have to re-equip our people. And we did some things then. And even with COVID, I wrote another book called The Unexpected Learning Moment, which was leading an organization through COVID. And people said, how did you hold on to your culture during COVID? Well, we held on to it because we went into it with a very high and strong culture. And we did extremely well, even though we weren't as connected physically as we could have been. And I think the sparkle in the sky is when I first started going to Wall Street, and this was in the early 2000s, talking about the importance of culture in an organization. I got this. I didn't get much attention from, we don't need to know about that. Just tell me what the bottom line is. In my later years, in the last years I was at the company, particularly, just before and after COVID, investors are now understanding that culture in organizations is something that is truly valuable. It's that one asset that's so powerful, but it's not on the balance sheet.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. That's good to hear.
Yeah, it is.
So is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to make sure that you share with the audience?
I think it's the principles that we've shared: belonging, do people matter, a clear purpose, great values, psychological safety, but it's consistency.
Mm.
You can't sprinkle fairy dust on an organization and change the culture. In fact, I have a good friend of mine. His name's Charlie Maloof. He's the CEO of Broad River Retail. They own a bunch of Ashley furniture stores out in North Carolina, the Charlotte area. And he shared with me once, he said, culture is not a microwavable event. It takes a crock pot approach. And that's a bit like
I love that.
Petri dish story.
Yeah.
But it's so true. I mean, in Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game, he says culture equals values plus behavior. And I added to that and I said culture equals values plus behavior times consistency.
Mm.
And it's the consistency that's so important. And leaders have to buy in because the fish rots from the head, Wendy.
Yes, I believe it. And is there anything, if you were wanting to influence a CEO, a peer, about the importance of culture, what would you say?
Go look at WD-40's performance and wish you bought the stock 20 years ago.
I love it. This has been a wonderful conversation. Everyone needs to go get Any Dumbass Can Do It. And how can listeners find you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, go to my website, www.thelearningmoment.net. And in fact, there is a quiz there where you can test your power of dumbassery. And the higher score you get of dumbassery, the better leader you are. So go to the website, take the quiz, and you'll get your dumbassery score. And I'll send you a playbook on some of the things you can start to work on. And then follow me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm posting there with different learning along the way. So happy to have people join in. And I also have on LinkedIn the School of Dumbassery. So if you want to join the group called the School of Dumbassery, you can join there as well, because I am the Dean of Dumbassery.
Awesome, Garry. Thank you so much for this conversation today. I really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. And thank you for doing what you do. We can change the world a little bit at a time.
I hope so. Thank you.